Hello everyone, welcome to this is video number 2 on React. So yesterday's video I wouldn't call a prerequisite because yesterday was a very high level beginner friendly how does React work under the hood. So you might be able to follow along today as well if you did not go through yesterday's class. Specifically, the topics that we will be going through today are the topics that you currently see on screen. That includes useState, useEffect, props, conditional rendering, children, lists and keys, inline styling. You can just read them, right? All of this is what we're covering today. Here is a link to the slides. So, if you already know this, then feel free to drop off also, or, revise. There aren't any assignments, although, a lot of the code that is written, if you don't read through the code, then it becomes an assignment, but there'll be proper assignments, tomorrow or day after that will be posted in the repository that we have. These are probably the first set of things that if you know, then you can create decently unstyled React applications. Adding styling to them involves learning about Tailwind or raw styles or whatever. But today we won't be doing that. We will create unstyled websites, so they will look very ugly, but they will have all the functionalities that we need. All of this is enough before we can start moving to two things: context API. Well, there are a few more hooks we need to know of, like use callback, use memo. Don't worry about if you don't understand what I said. Let's first begin with just see, what the level is. Yesterday people said class was easy, which I was very surprised with because React is where people get really hard. Also 90% people, were able to understand. So how many of you already know this? Maybe, React is just so popular now that everyone now knows React, which is why the retention is so high and everyone is able to understand. So do you already know all the concepts written on screen? Let's do a check of the room and see how many people already know this. Okay, 40% already know, or maybe lesser. Okay, 35%. So 65%, I'm assuming, don't know any of these things here, which is a fairly big number, which is why we will again go slow today. So if you feel you already know this, I would just urge to drop off. Why do you want to waste 2 hours? If you want to stick around, feel free to. There aren't any assignments that I can think of right now or I've put over here. This is anyways very simple stuff to, create an assignment for. So yeah, if you already know this, if you're in the 35% lot, feel free to drop off. With that, we're at 8:05 right now. So let's start today's class by recapping a few things from yesterday. And more importantly, making sure you all have a either local setup of whatever Replit, or you guys, I already have it here. I was trying error boundaries before. Let me restart a fresh React project, which you should as well. Ideally, you should run it locally. But again, for now, we're going to stick to Replit. If you want to run it locally, you can also use something called Vite to start the project locally. This is the most common, way to start a React project. Some of you might have heard of Create React App. That is one way, not recommended anymore. Vite is probably the best, as the name suggests, the best build tool for the web. Why is it called a build tool? Because it's helping you build your React project, convert your React project into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So feel free to use Vite. The command to run there is React, I think it's npx Vite, npx create Vite @latest. I think this is the command that if you run locally, then it'll Vite create React project. Let's see. There you go. npm create Vite @latest, not npx create Vite @latest. So if you run this command, what is the command that I ran again? The command that I ran was npm create Vite @latest. This will start a React project locally for you, or you can go to Replit and start one. Either is fine. Let me start one locally. Feel free to decide which one of these two you want to do. I'm going to call my project week 9 React practice. You can call the project whatever you want. What framework are we using today amongst all of these? We are using React. Are we using TypeScript yet? No, we are not. We are using JavaScript, and that is it. So what is the command that I ran? I ran npm create Vite @latest. I selected some options here: framework, React, variant, JavaScript. Let me open this project up in Visual Studio Code. So if I go to Visual Studio Code and open this project, I will see code that looks very similar to what would appear here on Replit. So if I open Replit, let me delete one of my old REPLs because I don't have a paid account. I can only create 3. And let me create a fresh REPL. And here, let me write React. When I select React JavaScript over here and click on Create REPL, same thing happens. You can run it locally. You can run it here on Replit. On Replit, if you try to explore the folder structure, it has a source folder inside which there's app.jsx and index.jsx. If you go to your local Visual Studio Code, you will see there is a source folder which has a app.jsx and main.jsx. So the projects look very similar. This has something called index.jsx. This has something called main.jsx. The main files are different for both of them, but both of them are React projects. If you go to app.jsx here, start to run this code, you will see a website on the right where whatever is written or whatever is returned from this app component is what appears over here. This app component, something we discussed yesterday. Now, if you weren't here yesterday, you will need to understand what is a component. But long story short, it is just a function. It is just a function which returns some HTML tag, let's say. Or technically it returns something else, XML. But let's say it returns some HTML for you. So यहाँ पे when I returned div hi there, that is what I saw on the screen. Have we broken Replit again? No, it is fine. If I want, I can make the HTML tag more complicated. So this is how you initialize a React project. This is sort of a prerequisite for today. Unless you're able to initialize a project, you will not be able to understand the rest of the things that we're learning today. Okay? So try to initialize it either on Replit like this or in Visual Studio Code. Again, open app.jsx and you will see something similar. Now this one has a lot of default code, but thankfully you can get rid of a lot of the default code over here and make it exactly the same as what we saw on Replit. So I can write hi there over here. Now I have a React project locally as well. If I want to access the website locally, the command that I have to run is npm run dev. First, I have to run npm install to install all the dependencies in my local React project. After that is done, I can run npm run dev to start the project locally on my machine. Now, if I go to localhost :5173, I will see hi there on the screen over there as well. Let me also put the bold tag over here. So now I have hi there written on the screen, and hopefully if I put this on the left, the browser also renders hi there. Now it is styled very well over here. That is because we have, some styles here in index.css that let me remove, and app.css, them also let me remove. And then you will see a simple hi there message. The same thing we saw on Replit, the same thing we are seeing locally here. So feel free to choose which one of these methods you want to choose. Either is fine for today. So if you are just on Replit, that is also fine. Feel free to continue on Replit. I will most probably be using my local setup. Now that I have set it up locally, why not use my local setup compared to Replit? Okay? Cool. Hopefully that is clear. Can we move on to the first one? The first, again, let me paste the slides for people who just joined. The first thing to learn today, which is something we have already learned yesterday, is the useState hook. Now, hook is a jargon that I sort of introduced yesterday, not really. But you will see throughout your React journey, okay, you will call a bunch of functions that start with use. Use state, use effect, use memo. These are popularly known as what? These are popularly known as hooks. And why do you need hooks in React? What do these hooks do in React? These let you, play with let you do a bunch of things. These let you hook into what are called side effects, more technically. What they let you do is, I should explain this better actually. Today we are going to learn about two hooks. The use state hook, the first thing right here, and right below it you will see a use effect hook. These are the two things that we need to learn about. The use state hook is easy. The use state hook is used to define the state of your application. Here, what is the state of my application? Again, go to yesterday's class. We discussed there is something called state. There is something called components. To create state inside a React project, we use the use state hook. लिख के देखते हैं, and then we will play with it a little bit and see how it changes and whether it works or not. They have defined a component called counter here. Let's try to write that counter variable ourselves. Okay? Let's not copy the code. Let's try to go to our project. This is my project. This is what it looks like. And let's try to code another component called counter. Now a React component is nothing but a function which returns you some HTML. Let's say an h1 tag where it returns you the count, let's say 1, and then a button that says increase count, something like this. I have defined the counter component. What is the counter component doing? Returning a div inside which there is an h1 tag where I've written 1 and a button tag where I've written increase count. That is it. Do you see anything change on the website? Harkirat, I don't, because I haven't used this component. If you look at it, this counter is a little light colored compared to app. Why? Because this is not being used in my application right now. If I write something like this though, counter, let's say something like this, which is, okay, along with the div tag, along with the bold tag, I want to use the counter tag. I haven't put anything inside, but I have rendered the counter. What have I done? I have rendered the counter. So if I save this, what do you see on screen? You see 1, which comes from here. You see increase count, which comes from here. This button right here. This is decent. It's almost like, everything is working fine and, we have a counter application. But what is the problem? Problem is the button does nothing. The button doesn't actually increase the value of this counter. So how can you do that? Ugly way is when you click on the button, on click equal to, let's say the on click handler says increase count. The on click handler, the button, the function that gets called when you click on the button, let's say we call it increase count. So now I have to define this function. Can I define it here? I can. Here, whenever this button is clicked, this function should get called. But usually all these functions are defined inside the component itself. Component returns some div, but a bunch of these functions that the component needs are defined inside the original component itself. There are a bunch of reasons why you might want to do this and why you might not want to pull this out. But abhi ke liye, bear with me and let's put this function inside this function. Harkiyat, can we do that? Yes, you can. You can put a function inside another function, or more technically in this case a component. ये एक component है, इसके अंदर हमने function डाल दिया. What is this function supposed to do though? इसको इसकी value बढ़ानी है. It needs to increase its value from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that. How can I do that? Hakirat, we learned this. You can add a ID over here. ID equal to, whatever, text. And यहाँ पे you can do some document.getElement by ID text dot inner HTML equal to something. You can increase its value. You can do that. You can do raw DOM manipulation here. But that is bad. This is something we discussed yesterday. Okay? When you are using React, you give React state and components. Now our component looks very pretty. We have written all the logic. Here, this is our component. Div tag, h1 tag, button. What we have not given is the state. What we have not told is that this number needs to be dynamic. यहाँ पे I don't need to write 1 or I shouldn't write 1. I need to write some dynamic variable, some state variable. That is why I put a, let's say, dynamic variable here called count. Now I can define count like this. Here, let count equal to 0. And whenever this button is called, let me do count equal to count plus 1. I can do that. But does this work as expected? Again, what have I done? Here, whenever the counter function is called, let's initialize count to 0. Let's return a div where there is a button which calls increase count whenever it is called. Whenever this button is called, call increase count. Is it working though? Let me save the file. Is it working? It is not. You can't take raw variables that I've defined here, or if I wanted, I could define both of them outside also. But you can't take these raw variables and put them in the dynamic part of your component. This is the dynamic part of your component. This is the thing that changes. Button ka text remains the same. Div remains the same. This is the part that changes. You can't define it as a raw variable. React is not looking at these raw variables. React says, I will re-render your application. I will change your application when you change the state variable, not these normal raw variables like we define in JavaScript. So what we have to do is convert this into a state variable. And for this, you need the useState hook. What do we need for this? The useState hook. The name itself is useState. I want to create a state. I want to update a state. That is what the useState hook lets you do. Where does it come from? It comes directly from React. So it is a raw hook that React provides you. We will write our own hooks in the future. We might use some, external hooks as well, which come from, let's say, import use Kirath from, Kirath library. We might do this in the future, but where are we importing from right now? The React library. So this is like a core hook that React provides you, which is why it's super important to understand. What does it do? Define your state variable over here. Render your state variable as you want to. And whenever the button is clicked over here, what we will do is, we will not do count equal to count plus 1. We will do set count. We will call this second function over here with count plus 1, something like this. This is how you create a counter application. If I now click on increase count, you will see the count go up. What did I do? Yaar, jab ye function call ho raha hai na, whenever this button is being clicked and this function is getting called, inside this function I say set count to be original count plus 1. What do I say? Yaar ye count variable hai na, isko 1 se badha do please. Please increase its value by 1. And then React automatically understands ki state has changed. And React re-renders this component and the count 2, 3, 4 reach over here. That is what useState lets you do. If you have a more complicated application, let's say I ask you to add a decrease button over here. How would you add the decrease button? Simple, right? I will add another button here called decrease count. When I click on the button, the decrease count function should get called. And here what will I do? Set count to count minus 1. If I refresh this, increase count is increasing the number. Decrease count is decreasing the number. I can add a third button that will reset the count. A third button called reset count. What does the reset count function do? On click, call the reset count function. What does the reset count function do? It resets the count to 0. It makes it 0 again. So now increase count increases the value, decrease count decreases the value, reset count resets the value to 0. This is how you create your very first counter application, let's say in React. What have we done? We have created an application where a user can come, click on 3 buttons, increase the value of a counter. Very dumb application, also looks fairly ugly. The thing to learn is that we have not done any DOM manipulation ourselves. What have we not done? We have not done any DOM manipulation ourselves. Is the DOM being manipulated from time to time? If I right click, click on inspect, go to elements, and then increase the count. Let me go here, body. Notice this number over here, 1. When I click on this, it becomes 2. Do you see this get highlighted? What does that mean? The DOM updates. Whenever I decrease count, whenever I increase count, the DOM updates. Have I ever written over here कि यार document dot get element by id something dot inner html equal to something? Have I manipulated the DOM myself? I have not. Who has done it? React has done it. How has it done it? Using the useState hook. This hook tells React that this is a state variable. Constantly keep looking at this state variable. If anyone calls set count, re-render the component. Whoever is using count, जैसे यहाँ पे we are using count over here, will re-render, and then React will change the actual DOM element. That is how the useState hook works under the hood. Yesterday we created the to-do application where we set the initial value to be an array. Today we are creating a counter application. So we are saying the initial value is 0. Do we understand the useState hook? Can we move to the useEffect hook, which we will from a problem statement? But let's first do a poll. Again, let me show you the code one more time. Let me trim it down to just the important bits. This is what the code looks like. Do we understand this? I would say 86% is pretty decent. So I will almost continue now. And for those who don't understand, think of this as initial boilerplate code, and yahan se start to learn the next set of things. Okay. But I will take doubts at the end. Cool. Let me clean the application up a bit. This is what our application looks like. There's a button that increases the value of the counter. Here is a count state variable. Now, let's say I ask you, KR, convert this into a clock. Starts from 1, keeps going up every 1 second. Convert this into a clock that increases this number by 1 every 1 second. 1, 2, 3, like that. What would you use for this? You would use set interval. Harkirat, we have learned set interval. I will use set interval over here. How would you use it? Where will you put the set interval? This thing right here. Abhi ke liye, when is count increasing? When I click on the button. When do I want the count to increase? I want, क्या यहाँ डाल देता हूँ, set interval function. This function will just increase the value of the count. जो चीज यहाँ हो रही थी button click पे, the thing that is happening when I click on the button, let me do the same thing every 1 second by putting this set interval over here. Let me get rid of this increase count button. Let me get rid of this increase counter function. Simple. What have we done? कि यार जब ये render होगा ना, whenever counter renders, I put a set interval over here. कि यार interval बना दो, that will increase the value of count every 1 second. And that is what sort of is happening over here. Can you see? Everything seems to work as expected. But do you see flashes slowly? Do you see 0? Can you see the application is going crazy? Something weird is happening. Let me restart the application. शुरू में तो सब सही था, just like a marriage. And then eventually what happened? Things start to fall apart. Wait for like 6 years or maybe 10 years. I don't know, not talking from experience, just, spitballing here. Can you see there are a lot of, flashes on the UI? The UI is, going from 0. And now for some reason, something weird is happening. What is wrong in our code? क्या गलती करी है हमने? It looks pretty simple. हरकियत थोड़ी देर पहले तो चल रहा था. When I have a button, and let's say I remove the set interval from here. If I refresh, clicking on the let me just put this code. Okay, feel free to write this code. Take a minute. Let me take a small 30-second break. 30 seconds के लिए. Try to write this code on your side as well if you were following along. Then you can practice this locally and try to figure out what's up. Small 30-second break. Ten more seconds. All right. What was I saying? कि the increase count button, when you click on it, we call something that increases the value here, changes the state variable that causes the value to get increased. जो भी है, क्लिक करने पे वैल्यू बढ़ती है. Now the same logic I put here. मैंने इसको कमेंट कर दिया. I removed the increase count button. I added a set interval. What does set interval do? It will call this function every 1 second. So every 1 second, set count will get called. But why does this break the application? Let's see. Let's put the application is breaking, that we can see for sure. शुरू में तो it looks okay, but eventually there's a lot of flashes that are coming over here. Application is going full crazy. The reason or the thing that is happening is, let's put a log over here. Console.log inside counter component. I repeat. What have I done over here? I have put a log called inside counter component. How many times do you think this log comes? ये log कितनी बार आएगा? Once. हकीरत app component में you have rendered counter component. तो हाँ, only once हकीरत. If you would have done it twice, like this हकीरत, then दो बार आता. If you would have done it thrice, then this log would have come 3 times. But हकीरत, since you have only done it once, so only one log should come over here. Only once should the component get rendered. But how many times is the log coming? Check the logs. It's going crazy. So many logs are coming. I can't even scroll down. इतने सारे आ गए. What does that tell you? क्या हमने set interval लगा तो दिया, पर क्योंकि if this log is coming infinite times, that means this set interval is also coming infinite times. बार बार this set interval function gets called, and this set count plus 1 is also getting called again and again. That is the problem with the current code base. That is what is making the app go crazy. अब वो क्यों हो रहा है, that is a different question. Why do we log again and again? Why are there infinite logs over here? Who is calling this counter function? कौन call कर रहा है इसे बार बार? Why is this counter function being, यही हो रहा है ना, if the log is coming, that means someone is calling this counter function. अब हमने तो एक ही बार डाला है, we तो rendered it only once. So who is calling this counter function again and again? That is React. React calls these component functions whenever a state variable changes. I repeat, ये जो count state variable है, this count state variable, anytime it changes, when will it change? Whenever set count is called. Whenever it changes, the count variable changes, we say that the app re-rendered. अगर मैं बटन को वापस ले आऊं, if I bring back the button, anytime I'm clicking on the button, we say that the app re-rendered. But what does re-rendering even mean? इसका मतलब है कि React ने ना कहीं जाके इन functions को call किया कि यार counter you might have changed. You might have changed and hence I'm going to call you. If I look at this, counter gets logged twice शुरू में. One small thing do for me for now. One small thing that I will not explain but we will do is go to main.jsx and remove strict mode from here for now. Eventually we will introduce it back. Remove strict mode. This will make our lives a little bit easier when we reach use effect also. What have I done? In main.jsx here, or if you are on Replit, then in index.jsx, remove react.strict mode. And then proceed like I am. ठीक है? Go back to app.jsx, open the application again. What do we see? We see कि the log comes only once. It was coming twice इससे पहले. We removed the strict mode for some reason. And now we only see it once. So it looks like कि Harkirat was right. If you render the counter once, the log over here comes once. Let me render it twice. Then the log came once and twice. If I refresh the page, there are 2 times counter got logged. If I, one over here and one over here. So if your application state doesn't change, अगर आपका set count call नहीं हो रहा है, तो ये एक ही बार render होगा. But if you call set count, if the state variable changes, जो यहाँ use भी हो रहा है, count is being used over here, then the counter function will re-render. If I click on increase count, every time I click on it, this function gets called again. This is what is called re-rendering of the काउंटर कंपोनेंट क्या हो रहा है, काउंटर कंपोनेंट री रेंडर हो रहा है. व्हाट डज दैट मीन कि यार उसके कंटेंट शायद चेंज हुए होंगे. देयर इज सम स्टेट वेरिएबल इनसाइड इट दैट समवन चेंज्ड. ये सेट काउंट कहीं तो कॉल हुआ. इन आवर केस इट गॉट कॉल्ड हियर. तो React will re-render the function. React will assume कि put a new count variable over here. क्या ये 16 हो गई है? Get back 16 as the h1 and put it on the DOM. So this is how React re-renders components. We kept on saying re-rendering happens, but when re-rendering actually happens, then this function gets called again. Now let's come back to the original problem. The original problem was कि create a counter, create a stopwatch. तो what we did was कि हमने यहाँ पे set interval डाल दिया. We put the set interval over here, and we said कि यार anytime this component re-renders interval बना दो. अब आप इसको यहाँ डाल रहे हो. If you are putting it here, then anytime the counter function re-renders, तो ये लाइन भी तो फिर से रन होगी. Just like this is running again, this will also run again, and the another interval will start, and then in the next re-render another interval will start. So we have a lot of intervals that are starting, which is why you were seeing a bunch of flashing here. So if I refresh this, अभी तो एक ही, every time you see a log here, मतलब एक नया interval बन रहा है. तो how many intervals do we have? We have 27 clocks running, 36 clocks running, 62 clocks running, all of them somehow changing this variable, which is why this is going crazy, and you see a bunch of flashes. So you can't simply put set interval over here. You have to do what is called hooking into the life cycle events of React. What do I have to do? कि यार React के ना कुछ life cycle events होते हैं. This is more for people who know class based components in React. हम वो भी पढ़ेंगे आज. We will learn that today as well. But what we want to do is कि यार whenever this component mounts, I repeat another thing I'm introducing here, कि जब ये पहली बार रेंडर हुआ ना, the first time it renders, तब ये रन करना बस, उसके बाद नहीं करना है. Don't run this on every render. Run this on the first render. That first render is what is called a life cycle event, specifically mounting. We want whenever this component mounts, mounting, re-rendering, unmounting, these are all life cycle events. कि ये component mount हो गया, पहली बार आ गया DOM में. ये component re-render हुआ, it is re-rendering now. ये component चला गया DOM से, then it has unmounted. So these are what are called life cycle events. And what do we want? We want कि यार जब भी ये mount हो, whenever this counter component mounts, we run this set interval. We don't want to run this on every render. We want to run it on the mounting of the component. For that, you use the use effect hook. I repeat, the next hook we are going to import from here is going to be use effect. And what are we going to do using the use effect hook? We will say, क्या ये जो सारा logic है ना, all the logic that I want to run only on mounting, I repeat, ये logic I want to run only when the component mounts, I will wrap this inside a use effect. मैं ये use effect hook use करूँगा. That takes two arguments, a function and what's called a dependency array. We will get to what this dependency array is. And मैं अपना logic इस first function के अंदर डाल दूँगा. I know it's a little complicated if this is the first time you're seeing it, but this will do what we want it to do. Writing this much code or wrapping your set interval inside a use effect will make sure कि कितने भी renders हों, no matter how many renders happen, this code runs only once. अब you might have this thought कि हरकियत आप तो कह रहे हो बार बार रन होता है. You are saying this code runs again and again. Doesn't that mean count will become 0 again and again? बार बार re-render हो रहा है तो यहाँ पे तो you are reinitializing it to 0. The answer is no. That is the whole point of a hook. The hook is hooked into the function. क्या ठीक है, आप re-render करते रहो जितना भी. This is initialized only once. उसके बाद अगर set count call हुआ है 2, 3, 4, 5 हो जाएगा. Doesn't matter how many times you re-render. The first render पे count gets initialized to 0. उसके बाद if the count is increased, all of these lines of code run again. ये line of code भी फिर से run होगी, but this will not reinitialize count to 0. And similarly, ये line of code तो फिर से run होगी on every render, but अंदर का logic नहीं run होगा. This will be completely ignored this on the second render, on the third render, on the fourth render. That way, ये कोड सिर्फ एक बार कॉल होगा, बार बार कॉल नहीं होगा. This code will get called only once. That is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to guard our set interval from re-renders. क्या doesn't matter कि कितनी बार render हो, पहली बार the first time it renders, create the interval. We have done that by using the useEffect hook. Now the useEffect hook does a bunch of things. We will soon be learning about this dependency array. But if this dependency array is empty, then it does what I just said, which is when the component mounts, ये function call होगा. Let me also put a log here. Mounted. Okay? We have this counter log outside. We have this mounted log inside. Let's see if it works. Console, refresh. Can you see? Counter पहले भी आया and keeps on coming, but mounted only came once. I repeat, the mounted log only came once. One more thing you have to do right now is this. I'll explain why. But for now, so this set count, going back to useState for just 1 second. useState में ऐसा होता है कि the second function that you have over here, specifically set count, this function that you have over here, you can give it a new value. For example, I give it 1000 or 10,000. So you will see पहले तो 0 आया और फिर सीधा 10,000 आ गया. तो I can either give it the final value directly. तो हम क्या दे रहे थे? हम दे रहे थे count plus 1. क्या जो value है उसमें 1 add कर दो. Or you can be like, यार I am going to pass in a function here जिसमें current value input आएगी और मैं यहां से return करूंगा whatever I want it to become based on the current value. You might say, हरकीरत count ही तो है current value is count only. तो हरकीरत, why don't you write count plus 1 over here? This is the current value, write count plus 1 over here. Why did you create a function जिसके अंदर current value आप कह रहे हो आएगी? current value तो count ही है. तो why are you getting count here and then returning count plus 1? Why are you not simply doing count plus 1 over here? That is where this dependency array comes into the picture. ये जो dependency array है, since I have not passed count as a dependency over here, I can't simply use count यहाँ पे. I can't write count plus 1. ये जो array है, I'm complicating things a bit. I will re-explain this. But this array is empty right now, which basically means इसके अंदर आप कोई state variable use नहीं कर सकते. You can try, जैसे हम यहाँ कर रहे हैं count को. हम इस state variable को यहाँ use कर रहे हैं. But that will give us troubles. As you see over here, let me save this and refresh. 1, and then it stays at 1. It doesn't go up to 2, 3, 4. Versus, if I convert this into a function, this also does the same thing, gets converted into a function. These are the arguments to the function, one single argument. This is what the function returns, count plus 1. This syntax feels weird. Then you can also do set count function count, which returns count plus 1. This and this, they both do the exact same thing. आप function ऐसे भी pass कर सकते हो. You can pass the function like this, or you can pass the function like this. We have chosen the first route. It is much cleaner and easier to write. Now our application, does it work as expected? Let's refresh. 0, 1, 2, सब सही है. Only one thing I changed, which is the way I am calling set count. Why we will get to very soon. But rather than simply doing count plus 1 इसके अंदर, I created a function where I returned count plus 1. Cool है. Let's do a poll very soon. 8:42 हो गए. Let me recap everything from this part of the video, which is using useEffect. useState hook we thoda understand. We're learning about the useEffect hook. What does the useEffect hook do? Okay, whenever it hooks into some life cycle events. What does the use effect hook do? It hooks into some life cycle events. Specifically, the life cycle event we are worried about is mounting. क्या जब ये component mount हुआ, जब ये component DOM में पहली बार घुसा, first time it went to the DOM, is when I want to run this logic. मुझे interval एक ही बार बनाना है. उसके बाद doesn't matter how many renders happen. I don't want this set interval call to happen again. So this is how you can run some logic on mount. How can you run some logic on re-render? उसको तो यहीं लिख दो. If you write some logic here, that will run on every re-render. How can you run some logic on unmounting? We will get to very soon. But do we understand how have we created our counter application? We don't need this button anymore. We don't need the increase count button anymore or function anymore. This much is our application. We have an app component which has a div and renders the counter component, which has this counter component where we first define a state variable and then inside a use effect create an interval which increases the value of count by 1 every 1 second, and finally we render the count variable over here. Let's do a poll and go from there. You can still see the logs. ये बार बार log हो रहा है. This is getting logged again and again. This gets logged only once. Can we do a poll, Akash? Let me try to do it. Oh, there we go. ये नहीं समझ आया. कोई issue नहीं है. We will take break. We will spend some time here. Let me look at Q&A and answer some questions before we proceed at all. Can you explain use effect with fetch? Use effect with anything is the same. क्या आप यहाँ पे अब set interval लगा रहे हो या फिर यहाँ पे आप fetch लगा रहे हो? That just depends on the application developer. कि what do you want to do inside the effect? What do you want to do when the app, the component mounts? If there is rendering, how counter is getting called? Counter is getting called by the React compiler. React का जो code लिखा हुआ है. Go back to yesterday. What were we doing yesterday? Let me open the slides from yesterday. If you remember yesterday, what did we do? We said कि यार हम React जैसा कुछ बनाएंगे. Oh. We said we will create something like React, and we ended up writing this code right here. Yesterday, we ended up writing this code right here when we created our own library very similar to React. Do you remember? यहाँ पे I was calling button component re-render again and again. Whenever someone clicked on the button, whenever if you understand this code from yesterday, whenever the button was clicked, button.set attribute on click on button press. What was on button press doing? It was changing the state variable just like we did set count equal to count plus 1. It was calling button component re-render. What was button component re-render doing? It was calling the button component. It was calling a function जहाँ पे हमने ये सारा logic लिखा हुआ है कि how to create a button. Are we not doing the same thing here on the right? This syntax is different. Here also, this is a function called button, a component called button. And anytime state changes, we are seeing कि ये call होता है बार बार. This function gets called again and again. Wasn't the same thing happening yesterday when we created our own React library? यहाँ पे भी तो I have defined a function. I have called it button component. It returns me some HTML which is of a button tag. And whenever the state changes, I call button component re-render, which creates a new component, passes in the state. तो यहाँ पे भी तो यही हो रहा था. Yesterday also the same thing was happening. React को आपने structure दे दिया है कि यार ये रहा मेरा component, ऐसे बनेगा. To React, we have given this structure कि यार my component looks like this. It is very dynamic based on this count variable. But whenever this count variable changes, React will need to call the counter function, right? कि भाई अब तेरी value क्या है? अब क्या return कर रहा है तू? What are you returning to me now? How does the DOM look like now? That is why anytime the state variable changes, anytime set count gets called, this function re-renders. Let me look at some more Q&A. If it is only called mount, then how is the counter incrementing on re-rendering? This is only called on mount, which starts a clock, which makes sure this is getting called every 1 second, वी वॉन्ट सेट इंटरवल, ये पूरी चीज टू गेट कॉल्ड वंस. एक बार ये कॉल हो गई तो उसके बाद इट विल इट सेल्फ मेक श्योर कि ये बार बार एवरी 1 सेकेंड इट इज गेटिंग कॉल्ड. सो दिस गेट्स कॉल्ड वंस, all of this, which makes sure this gets called every 1 second. Why is it called cleanup? This is not called cleanup. We will learn about cleanup very soon when we reach unmounting. None of this is called cleanup. Recap. What does the second argument do? We will get to very soon. Set count plus 1. How? Explain use effect hook once more time. All right. Let's do this one more time from the top. One more time from the top. What are we learning about? We are learning about the use effect hook. कि ये hook क्या करता है. Let's delete everything and simply create our original app. कि एक H1 है और एक button है. Let me command Z a few times. There we go. There we go. This is the code that I have written now. Let's go through the code again. एक app component है which renders a counter component where we have a state variable, right after which I put the first log, and then a function called increase count that gets called whenever this button is clicked. ठीक है, simple, straightforward, nothing too complicated. If I look at this on the website, it works as expected. And notice कि counter keeps on getting logged every time I click on the increase count button. इस पर click किया, नया log came. Clicked on it, new log came. So this log right here tells you कि ये function बार बार call हो रहा है. This function is getting called again and again. Now if I tell you कि यार I want to run some logic only on mount. I want to run some logic सिर्फ जब पहली बार ये component render हो. The first time this component renders, I want this to run. I want some other logic to run. After that, I only want this to run. I do not want the other logic to run. So what will I do? I will first call the use effect hook here. What is the use effect hook? It is a hook, which is a function only. So I will call a function which will take another function as an input. Do we remember callbacks? Inside a function, you can pass a function. That is the first argument to the effect hook. The second argument is what is called a dependency array, which we will be getting to very soon. थोड़ा समझ आ रहा होगा, dependency array. But even if you don't understand it, it is fine. And then I will write, let's say, the other log, okay? On mount, something like this. If I refresh, click on increase count, it says counter on mount, counter. Keep clicking on it. Only this log is coming. This log is not coming anymore, which tells you कि यार ये function call तो होता है, this function gets called, but it skips through this logic. It doesn't run this. इसको skip करके आगे निकल जाता है. तो this function gets called again and again. The counter function gets called again and again, but skips through this logic right here. So that is what the use effect hook lets you do. Now what did we want? We wanted कि एक clock बन जाए. We want one clock to be created that is increasing the counter again and again. We want कि that is increasing the counter again and again. We want कि on mount जब ये component पहली बार यहाँ आए, first time it comes, I want to start a clock. So what do I do? Here I, rather than logging, call set interval. What does set interval do? It takes a function as an input and some time as an input. Function में हम लिखते हैं कि what should happen every 1 second. If I write, let's say, console.log from inside the callback over here, comma 1000, then what will happen? This gets called on every render, but ये जो logic है gets called once, which makes sure ये logic हर 1 second चलेगा. And can you see? Every 1 second, this thing gets logged on the screen. But what do we want to happen every 1 second? But what do we want to happen every 1 second? We want this number to go up every 1 second. हम ये नहीं चाहते कि हमारा log आए, हम चाहते हैं ये नंबर बढ़ जाए, तो rather than calling this, I call this set count plus 1. Not simply count plus 1, for some reasons related to this dependency array. We will be coming to them very soon. I say set count arrow count plus 1, refresh. Now if you look at it, we have our to do counter application. Why is it working? It is working because ये जो logic है एक बार रन होता है. If I take this outside the effect, तो क्या होगा? This will run on every render and our application will go crazy. That is the thing that was happening initially. One clock application will go crazy. That is the thing that was happening initially. One clock came, bunch of clocks came, बनी जा रही हैं clocks. Can you see these numbers going up so quickly? Because so many clocks are running that are calling this function. And whenever this function gets called, count is getting increased by 1. So, the count increased so exponentially. But if I take logic and put it inside the use effect, nothing else I change, then ये जो logic है only runs once. Now do we understand the use effect hook? We still have to go through what is a dependency array and something called cleanup. Two things that people just, we have to go through what is a cleanup in the use hook, in the use effect hook, and what is a dependency array. But before we go there, can we do another poll and see how well people are doing? Do we understand use effect now? Sort of. 90% is great or 86% decent. All right. Two more concepts in use effect. Uske baad use effect done hai. You are done with the two biggest hooks in React. Maybe something else, someone else asked how can you use fetch inside use effect? So let's discuss all three of these things today. Let's discuss dependency array, cleanup, and using fetch inside the hook. Kick things off with the cleanup. Cleanup se start karte hain. Let's say I change the logic a little bit. मैं थोड़ा before I reach cleanup, can I introduce one more concept called conditional rendering? The name itself is gives away a lot of things. Conditional rendering. What is conditional rendering? पहले ये learn करेंगे. Then we will learn about all three of these things. Okay? So the next section is going to be about conditional rendering, which will help us learn about the dependency array, cleanup, and this third thing I've written over here. Okay? So deep breaths before we proceed. Take 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Even if you did not understand, that is fine. Next up, we're going to learn about conditional rendering. Here is a practice for you guys. For 2 hours, like during the class or otherwise, don't touch your phone. For example, don't touch your phone. For example, like a break. So my first thought was, trying to pick up the phone and go through Twitter or something. But I can't, I'm forced, I'm in a class, whatever. But I'm sure there's no such woe on you, whatever, someone watching on you, I'm sure half of you or maybe all of you during the class are, have phone on the right and Harkiyat is coding, let him code and phone. So, thankfully I'm forced to do a lot of these things. The same thing happened when I was in school. I was forced to go to school every day, which created a very good habit because my school wasn't dummy. So, that sort of helped me in JEE prep also because I was forced to wake up every day at 7 and, spend an hour going to school. So, very bad, just one random thought that came, how accustomed we have become to open our phones. That's the first thought that came to my mind. Involuntarily, I was going out for my phone whenever I thought about 30-second break. All right, break is done. Thought about 30-second break. All right, break is done. Shall we understand conditional rendering? Name itself is self-explanatory. कि यार कभी मुझे ये counter component render करना है. कभी नहीं करना है. I want to render this counter component sometimes. Don't want to render it some other times. Randomly render करना है. कभी it should appear, sometimes it should not appear. So what can I do? Let's start with creating a normal variable. Let counter visible equal to true. ठीक है. Let counter visible equal to true. And if this counter variable is true, then I want counter to render, else I want nothing to render. तो ये मैंने अब कुछ नया लिखा है that might be a little complicated for some people to digest because this is using the ternary operator. If you don't understand this, you can also write this. Okay, if the counter visible variable is true, तब counter को render कर दो. You can write it like this. You can write it like this. Both will do slightly different things, but more or less the same. As you can see, I have two counter variables rendered now. Sorry, components rendered now. This counter component, this counter component. So this is what conditional rendering is. Okay, based on a certain condition, render a component. अब इसको अगर मैं false कर दूंगा, if I set this to false, then what is happening? I see nothing. If I set this to true, then what is happening? I see something. Now, given you guys know about use effect, can you mini assignment for three minutes? Can you write this logic? कि conditionally render the counter component. कभी render होना चाहिए, कभी render नहीं होना चाहिए. Given this code, let me also put this code in a gist and share it with you guys. So can you write some code yourself from first principles and try to conditionally render counter on the screen using either of these methods? ये वाला complicated है, कोई बात नहीं. Use this method. What does this method say? Let's say hi is put above, hello is put below. If I refresh, I see hi, hello. I don't see the counter component in the middle. But if I set this to true, then I see hi. Then if I set this to true, then I see hi, then the counter component, then hello. How can you make it render conditionally? Should be very simple. Think about it. I will look at Q&A until then, but try to code this. Okay, every 5 seconds it goes down, goes up randomly. Looking at Q&A until then, while some of you try to code this. Can you explain count plus 1? Yes. So this, if you don't understand this, you hopefully already understand this. ये तो समझ आ रहा है, ये तो कल ही किया था. This will not work though. Why? We will discuss when we reach the dependency array. Count actually needs to be a dependency over here. If count isn't a dependency over here, it will cause problems if you're using it directly. So you can't use it directly, which is why you use it indirectly. You say set count indirectly. You say set count function which gets the current count as an input, or you can say CNT, and returns CNT plus 1. Actually, this and this are two ways to update a state. आप या तो directly कर सकते हो, give it some value directly over here, or you can give it a function where you will get the current value as the input. You can return the updated value based on the current value. तो अगर आपको current value use करनी है ना, if you ever want to use the current value of a state variable, use this syntax. Do not use this syntax. If you want to hard code some value over here, then do whatever you want. Something like this, fine. But if you want to use the existing value, don't use it directly like this. Get the current value through this function, make the argument a function and not the actual value. So that is just another way to write the syntax. And this syntax and this syntax are exactly the same. This is just another way to write a function, right? This is an arrow function which takes count as an argument. We take CNT as an argument here. It returns CNT plus 1. I write count plus 1 here. I can also write something like this. So it's just different ways to write the same thing. So don't get too, it's just a single line of code if you write the arrow function, which is why people use it. All right. Whenever it re-renders upon state, why doesn't it set the value to 0? I discussed this a while back. Because I have not written let count equal to 0. Every time it renders, why does it not go inside here? Every time it renders, why does it not go inside here? Because hooks can hook into the life cycle events. उनको समझ आता है कि अच्छा ये तो re-render है. useState will not get defaulted to 0 on every re-render. Only during mount its value will get initialized. Similarly, useEffect will not run any logic unless a dependency changes. So that is why, this doesn't get reinitialized again and again. Math.random, someone said. Perfect. A lot of people have posted the code, which is perfect. Use effect is calling set table one time, correct. All right, let me write the code as well. Can you tell me, never mind, like random thought I was sharing. But basically, why is it going crazy right now? हमारा code तो सही है. Our code is right. Our dependency crazy right now. हमारा code तो सही है. Our code is right. Our dependency are here. Why is it going crazy over here? Can some of you guess what is happening here? It's HMR. What is HMR here? Hot module replacement. It's basically I have multiple clocks over here because the code automatically comes over here. When we reach cleanup, you will see this weird thing won't happen. As I change my code and save the file, the counter doesn't go crazy. But right now, if I change my code and save the file, this counter will begin to go crazy. That is what is happening. All right. Cool. This is our code currently. And some of you wrote the code correctly, like the solution correctly. For conditional rendering, what is the code? You guys first converted this into a state variable. What is the code? You guys first converted this into a state variable. Counter visible, comma, set counter visible. That way, this counter visible is a state variable that is set to true initially. Okay, sab sahi hai. Now what do we want? Every 5 seconds, let's say, it becomes false. So what can I do? I can add a use effect over here, right? Create an interval where every 5 seconds, now someone wrote this, which is an elegant solution. Every 5 seconds I do set count to be not C. Basically means flip its value. If it was true, make it false. If it was false, make it true. That is what this line of code does over here. What was this going? Set count C plus 1. अगर ये 3 है इसको 4 कर दो, 4 है 5 कर दो. What is this doing? C not C. अगर true है इसको false कर दो. अगर false है इसको true कर दो. That is what this line of code over here is doing now. Now this counter visible variable will flip between true and false every 5 seconds. If I save this and refresh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it went away because this counter visible variable became false. Ab 5 second baad it will come back. Didn't come back. Even though the render happened, it didn't come back. Time to debug. Am I missing something obvious here? Oh, there you go. I forgot to put dependency array here. I don't think that will matter. Let's try it one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, gone. 1, 2, 3, 4 came. 1, the dependency array was the issue. 4 gone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 came. So are we conditionally rendering this counter? Yes, Akirat. Everything feels fine. Yes, Akirat. Everything feels fine. कुछ गलत लग तो नहीं रहा है इसमें हकीकत. You have been able to conditionally render a bunch of components. But can some of you guess कि इसमें अभी गलती क्या है? Even though visually it looks perfect, but there is one small performance downside of what we have done right now. Can you guess what that performance downside is? I'm sure some of you already know. But that is where the not dependency array, but something over here will come into the picture. We now hopefully understand conditional rendering. ये तो simple ही था कि if this is true, then render this, वरना मत करो. And what have I done? I have inside the use effect created a set interval that changes counter to true false every 5 seconds. हर 5 सेकंड में ये वेरिएबल false बन जाता है, true बन जाता है, false बन जाता है, true बन जाता है. Whenever it is true, I render the बन जाता है, false बन जाता है, true बन जाता है. Whenever it is true, I render the counter on screen over here. So that is what we have done. But there is one very big performance downside to this. The performance downside is कि यार जब भी आप ये counter variable render कर रहे हो, whenever you are rendering the counter, you are creating a clock. Whenever it mounts, you create a clock. But did you ever stop the clock? When the component unmounted, did you stop the clock? You did not. हमने कहीं पे भी clear interval function ही नहीं यूज किया है. We have not used the clear interval function. So if I put a log over here, console.log hi there, and refresh this, we see hi there once. ठीक है, एक बार clock start हो गई. Set interval started the clock once. Now the component unmounted. That doesn't mean the clock has stopped. Let me put another log here. Console.log from inside the interval. If I start this, can you see? From inside the interval आ रहा है बार बार, क्योंकि every 1 second that gets called. अब component नहीं है यहाँ पे, फिर भी from inside the interval आ रहा है, because the clock is still running. आपका component unmount हो गया. Notice कितने सारे आ रहे हैं अब, because 2 times the component mounted, 2 clocks started, clocks never stopped. अब ये चलता जाएगा, तो notice no counter component here, yet from inside the interval is getting logged. ये बार बार log हो रहा है. इसका मतलब क्या है कि ये clock चल रही है. This clock is constantly running. ये clock चल रही है. This clock is constantly running when it shouldn't. अगर कंपोनेंट ही यहाँ नहीं है, if the component is not here, then why do you need the clock to run? So that is a problem. That is where the cleanup will come into the picture. कि यार आपने माउंटिंग पे तो कुछ लॉजिक रन किया. You wrote some logic when the component mounts. This logic right here. You did not write any logic when the component unmounts. This is another life cycle event. जब भी ये माउंट हो रहा है, whenever it is getting put on the DOM, you did something. Whenever it is unmounting, whenever it is getting taken away from the DOM, तब भी तो कुछ करना है, तब भी तो you have to stop the clock. So that is the logic we have to write next. Separately, do you guys know how to stop a clock? कभी भी अगर आप clock लिखते हो, even in a Node.js program, the way to stop it is by using a लिखते हो, even in a Node.js program, the way to stop it is by using a function called clear interval. Some of you might know this, some of you might not know this. Even outside of React, if you have ever started a clock, you can stop the clock by calling set interval. This set interval function actually returns you a variable, and आपको बस इस variable को pass करना होता है to the clear interval function. So if you call clear interval, I repeat, if you call clear interval, this is a global function, just like set interval is a global function, clear interval is a global function. This one creates a clock, this one stops the clock. When do we want the clock to be stopped? When the component unmounts. And unmounting का component unmounts, and unmounting का logic ऐसे लिखा जाता है. This is how you write the logic for cleanup, the logic for what logic should run when the component unmounts. ये logic run हो रहा है when the component mounts. ये logic run हो रहा है when the component unmounts. We are stopping the clock. We are doing manual cleanup ourselves. React cannot do that. React को नहीं पता कि आपने यहाँ clock start कर दी है, तो when the component unmounts, it should stop it. React does not know that. You as the application developer have to take care of that. One important interview question: if you miss this ever, you start a clock and did not do this, then you're screwed. Or if you write this logic yourself, not during an interview but otherwise, then also this is a bad. You'll see performance. Or if you don't understand this also, मान लो कि you see this in a code base, you don't understand what this is, then again your interview will go bad. So this, whenever you create a use effect, you can return a function from it. इसके अंदर का logic run होगा. The logic inside this will run whenever currently the component unmounts. बाद में we will change this dependency array, so this condition will change. But for now, this logic runs on mount. This function, on mount, and then this logic runs on unmount. From inside set interval. अब देखते हैं क्या हुआ है. What are we trying to learn? Clean up. What have we already learned? Trying to learn clean up. What have we already learned? Conditional rendering. Conditional rendering we have already learned कि यार ये काउंटर वेरिएबल 5 सेकंड के लिए माउंट हो जाता है, 5 सेकंड के लिए अनमाउंट हो जाता है. वी माउंट इट फॉर 5 seconds, वी अनमाउंट इट फॉर 5 seconds. What are we doing inside the counter component or counter function? This is running on mount. This logic is running when the clock starts. This logic is running on unmount. This logic is running when the clock stops. If I refresh, there is an error or what? No. All right. Can you see counter gets logged, which is this thing right here. इसको हटा देते हैं. Let's see what gets logged. On mount gets logged 5 बार set. On mount gets logged 5 बार set interval gets called. On unmount gets called. Notice अब ये logs बार बार नहीं आ रहे. The clock isn't running when the component is not on the screen. अगर ये component screen से हट गया, आप देखो हट गया, तो clock भी चलनी बंद हो गई. The from inside set interval function stops to get called. But now it is back on screen. अब फिर से आ गया, नया clock start हो गया, new clock started. It went away, clock stopped. It will come back, clock will start. So this cleanup is something you have to do yourself as the application developer. If you don't do this, आपकी clock infinitely run करती रहेगी background में. Your clock will keep on running in the background. This is how you write logic for unmounting. Whenever you want some logic to run when a component unmounts, you write it like this. You could, inside the use effect, you can simply return a function that does this. You can simply return a function that does this. ये सब मैं बोल रहा हूँ. I'm saying this कि this logic runs on mounting, this logic runs on unmounting. But this is only true because this dependency array is empty. अभी हम इसको change करेंगे. Then this logic will not run on unmount. This logic will not run on mount. It will run on different conditions. So we can say that this logic runs on mount, this logic runs on unmount if this dependency array is empty. If you put something here, this condition sort of becomes false. Something else, this runs under certain different conditions, this will run under certain different conditions. Cool. Do we understand number 1, conditional rendering, and number 2, unmounting / cleanup? Can we move on to dependency array next? Okay, we'll do Q&A. Don't worry about it. Hard concept, but like thankfully there are like 5-6 hard concepts only. Why do we return clear interval from use effect in app? I am not returning clear interval. I am not doing this. Oh, what do you say? Do we return clear interval? We don't. I am not doing this. I am returning a function. I am returning a function. अब उसके अंदर I can do 10 different things. One such thing that I'm doing is stopping the clock or calling clear interval on the clock. React को जिसको पता है unmount हो गया, React को कैसे पता है unmount हो गया, अब ये function call करो. यही तो काम है React का. That is, it is React is looking at these states. React is looking at these state variables, right? React is checking कि ये state variable change हो गया. अच्छा है, have to re-render now. It calculates the difference कि पहले क्या अभी DOM पे क्या है, what is present over here, and it is calculating what needs to appear over here. तो उसको diff पता चल जाता है, ये already है, ये अब मुझे बनाना है, तो ये remove हुआ होगा. That is how React knows कि the unmount has happened. That is how React knows कि this logic needs to be called, because React is what is updating your DOM, right? In the process it is calculating the difference कि अभी DOM कैसा है और आपके इस चेंज के बाद DOM कैसा होगा. It needs to calculate the difference कि how does the DOM look after this change that you've made. And that is how it knows कि this is the difference. Yesterday what did I say? React is a diffing library. Yesterday what did I say? React is a diffing library. React का मोटा मोटा काम यही है कि difference क्या है भाई, current state and next state, what is the difference? What do I need to put in? What do I need to pull out? So of course it is calculating that difference, and hence it knows which cleanup function to get called, to call. When count starts from 0 again, it should, so if you want that, then you want a different use case. You are saying, Kirat, I want count to not start from 0. I want count to start from the old value. So here you can do one of two things. You can either not conditionally, ये मत करो कि इसको render ही ना करो, keep it rendered, इसको छुपा दो, just hide it, put it inside a div. The question is कि how can the counter maintain its original value? अभी तो ऐसा हो रहा है, it restarts from 0. Refresh. What is happening right now? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then back to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Someone asked, how can I make sure that it doesn't start from 0 again? It retains its original value. Can you see? 1, 2, 3, restarts from 0. There are multiple ways to do this. Easiest ways, कि इसको बस छुपा दो, just hide this. So always render this. Don't unmount this ever, but conditionally hide it. Display, whatever. Visibility hidden. If counter visible is true, then hidden, else it is visible. So this is the easy way to do it. That way आपकी clock भी चल रही है, सब कुछ चल रहा है. Your clock is also running in the background. Your elements are also updating. You have just hidden them. So now if you see, but the problem there is, as you can see, there you can get rid of that by using display also. 7, 8, 9, 10, and it got hidden. This is of course the ugly way to do it. The better way to do it is कि आप इस count variable को, you bring this count variable up over here. For this we have to understand props. We haven't yet gone to props. The next thing we had to learn today was props only. But for this you will have to understand props. You can actually put this state variable up here. That way, irrespective of इसकी rendering, आपके पास एक state variable होगा. But let's get there when we reach props. All right. More questions? Can you please repeat the conditional rendering? Recap. Hi, how can you make some clock running, but it should show 1 to 5, then hidden, then 10 to 15? Yeah, hidden ka you understand, hopefully, the thing that I just shared. And yeah, you can also, pull up the clock to the top. You can, ये जो सारा logic हमने यहाँ लिखा है, you can write this logic in the app component. You can have this state variable in the app component and just conditionally render this and pass in the count as the prop. मैंने बहुत कुछ बोल दिया, आपको समझ नहीं आया होगा. But let me, what you guys, a lot of people are asking for this is, कि it's not going from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is not going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 0, 1. It is restarting from 0. How can we fix that? The most elegant way to fix that is, कि you pull this state variable यहाँ पे and you pass it as a prop, and you simply render this prop over here. That way, आपका जो count variable है, ये even if your component unmounts, ये कहीं नहीं जाएगा, it will still stay. So put your clock over here rather than having the clock over here. I'm writing a lot of things which I'm sure some of you don't understand, so don't worry about it. High level idea I'm giving. I've put the clock from here to here, pass the counter down नीचे. Now irrespective of, अब state variable बाहर आ गया इसके. अब जब app unmount होगी तब state variable will die. This state variable will die when the app unmounts. वो तो वैसे भी नहीं होगा. App never unmounts. So I moved the count variable here. I started the clock on the top over here, and now I can conditionally render this based on counter visible. When didn't 919? Sorry, I'm just trying to think. Okay, what more can we cover today? Or if people want to leave, then they can leave. Unmounting. One more thing we have to cover today is dependency array. We can do it later on, or it's like very simple. Dependency array is one third thing we have to learn. I know we've learned a lot today, it's very grueling, but spend maybe 10-15 more minutes with me. Let's understand dependency array, and then I will take as many questions as possible. Okay, let's understand, let's clean up the whole project. एकदम साफ कर देंगे इसे. Get rid of everything, and let's understand use effect again. Let's also understand the dependency array, जो अभी तक हमने समझा नहीं है. ठीक है? Cool. What are we doing now in this next section? Let's take a 30 seconds break. Relearning, cleanup, use effect, learning about dependency array. This is going to be the next part of this class. 30-second break. Let's look at Q&A. Another example of cleanup someone gave is cancelling fetching and redirect to other page. Another example is closing your WebSocket connections. A lot of times, a component will need a live connection to a server. So it will start a WebSocket connection in the use effect, and in the cleanup, it will stop the WebSocket connection. Does it mean if we don't stop the clock, new clock starts every time, infinite clocks may run at time? Yes, that is exactly what it means. You will have infinitely many clocks running in your browser. So basically the code we write in use effect is used at the time of mounting, ignored during re-rendering, and the function we return is called at the time of unmounting. That is 100% correct and a very nice way to put it. I should have also put it that way only initially, but yes, this is 100% true and a very nice statement that you've said over here. Same code is acting weird on my machine, even inside use effect. My hook is going crazy. Have you added the empty dependency array? Most probably my guess is you missed that. Of course, your code is different. If it is the same, it should work. Try the code from the gist. Where did it go? Can you paste the gist again, Akash? Try the code from there. It should work. Inside set interval, how can C variable update state? C is a random variable that I put. You can name it whatever you want. ऐसा कोई ज़रूरी नहीं है कि just because I've written set count C plus 1, you can write set count Harkirat plus 1. I am simply calling a function and इसके अंदर I am passing another function. अब इस other function के arguments depend on me. I can name it whatever I want. I can name it Ram plus 1. The key point is कि whatever is coming as the input, that plus 1 is going to be the output. All right. We should return the function which contains clear interval while state variable is false. So you should return the function which contains while state variable is false, but you are returning the component. We should return the function. We should return function which contains clear interval while state variable is false, but you're returning it in the component. I don't know what this means. Sorry, I've read through it a few times. I did not understand it. You might be saying something right. That sounds very smart, but I'm not able to understand what it is. Let me paste it here so we can discuss it later. This is what you meant, or I've noted it over here. We'll come back to it. All right, guys. 30 seconds are up. Let's recap use effect and let's understand. Oh, shoot. Let's understand, everything from scratch one more time. Just use effect, and use effect is hard, so don't worry if you did not understand things abhi tak. Okay? What are we learning about use effect? Dependency array and then cleanups. All right. I have been lying to you until this point. I said कि अगर आपको ऐसा करना है ना, if you want to do this, कि whenever this counter component, which let's say is a simple component that does nothing, simply returns counter. I said okay, whenever you want something to run when this mounts, you can use a use effect. I said this, okay, write a use effect, or call the use effect function, the use effect hook, give it another function as an input. Inside here, let me write render and give it a dependency array as the second input. This second thing we did not talk about. I simply said this logic will only run on the first render. This logic will only run on the first render. And the second thing I said was return function. Okay, this specific function ka jo content hai, which is this thing right here, will run on unmount. This will run on mount. This will run on unmount. This much use effect we have learnt until now. Forget all clock logic, everything. Don't worry about that. Use effect, I said, okay, whenever you want something to run when the component mounts, write it inside the use effect. Whenever you want something to run when the component unmounts, return it from a function over here. Return, make sure the use effect का जो input function है, that itself returns a function, and whatever logic is written over here, React will itself make sure that when the component unmounts, this logic runs. This is true, but not technically true. One big thing I hid from you until this point was this dependency array. The lifecycle events that I have written over here, right? Mounting, re-rendering, unmounting, are just some lifecycle events you might want to listen to. You might want to listen to these events. कि यार ये कब हो रहा है? I want to run something. ये कब हो रहा है? I want to learn something. ये कब हो रहा है? I want to run something. But you might also want to run some logic when a state variable changes. I repeat, जब भी कोई state variable change होता है, whenever a state variable changes, you might want to run some logic. कि यार ये code को run करो जब ये state variable change होगा. That is where this dependency array comes into the picture. पहले तो इसको देखते हैं. First, let's see this again. And when does mount run? When does unmount run? If I put this on the left, open the code on the right, export the function from here. Maybe it's default. What am I missing? Export default function app. There you go. All right. What have I done? Counter variable looks over here, very nice. It gets rendered from here. इसके बाद if I want to write after counter, I see that here as well. So our application is working. If I look at the logs, what gets logged? Mount gets logged. Unmount did not get logged because I did not unmount this specific component. तो कैसे run होगा? If you add conditional rendering here, you will see unmounting get logged over here as well. This is true. Okay, mounting and unmounting happens if your dependency array is empty. Now let me change the application a bit. मैं ना counter का logic बाहर लिखूंगा. I will write the counter logic outside in this app component. यहाँ पे I will start the clock. A lot of you were asking, right, कि हरकीरत 0 से start हो रहा है बार बार. It starts from 0, goes to 5, then hides for 5 seconds, then starts from 0 again. So let's fix that. Let's define a state variable called count here at the top. ठीक है? And inside this counter component, let me simply pass the count as a prop. What am I passing it? I am passing it down as a prop. What is a prop, Harkira? The thing that we were supposed to learn next. But basically, think of it similar to an argument to a function. ये एक function है, right? So just like you pass an argument to a function, you pass props to a component. तो ये मैंने counter component render किया है. I am rendering the counter component. And I am saying here you are going to receive some props as input. Now I can name this argument whatever I want, arg, random, but common practice is to name it props, props. And I am saying here you are going to render props dot count. This count state variable I am not defining here anymore. I have not done this कि यार count को यहाँ render कर देते हैं. No. What have I done? I have put the count variable here and passed it down as a prop to the counter component, and that is what I render over here. Let me also put a button. Let's forget about a clock for now. Let me put a button over here. On click equal to increase count. What have I done? Something that broke the application. I'm sure some of you already see it. Some reference error. Increase is not defined. Let's define increase as a function where we do what? Set count. C+1, or if you want, यहाँ पे तो you can do this as well, count +1. Either one of these is fine. Let's stick with the original one, this guy right here. Now if I click on increase count, same thing happens. I haven't changed anything. You can also put the clock logic over here. That will also work. Put a clock logic inside a use effect, counter will go up. But now let's say मैं आपको कहता हूँ कि यार inside this component run some logic whenever props.count changes. जब भी ये change हो रहा है, whenever this changes, run some logic. I don't want some logic to run when the component mounts. I want some logic to run whenever this count variable changes. This is where the dependency array comes into the picture. I can define another effect. You can define 10 different effects. ऐसा नहीं है कि आप एक ही कर सकते हो. So let me define another effect where I will write कि यार console.log count has changed, and then here I can pass props.count in the dependency array. This is the dependency array कि जब क्या चेंज हो रहा है जब मैं रन करूं. If count changes, then run this. If nothing changes, then run this, which means only run it once. So this will run only once because it is not listening to anything. It is not waiting for some state variable to change. But this use effect is waiting for props.count to change. जब भी change होगा, whenever it changes, this will get called. So is use effect used only for lifecycle events? No, it is not used only for कब mount हुआ, कब unmount हुआ. It is more generic कि आप whenever you want to run some logic, whenever a bunch of state variable changes, then you use effect. अब a consequence of that is कि if you pass an empty array, that means कि यार this logic will at least run once. You are not listening to something new, but एक बार तो run होगा. Same thing will happen here. The first time the count that comes here, this specific code will get called, and every time count changes, this specific code will get called again. Let's see if that happens. Let me refresh. Let me look at the logs. Console. Click on increase count. Count has changed. Count has changed. Every time I increase count, this code runs. So does that tell you okay, that is what this dependency array does? Ab, if I don't change count and change some other variable, तब ये call नहीं होगा. If I introduce another state variable here, let's say we have count. I also introduce count2. And I say, count2 equal to count2. And I introduce another button which calls the decrease function, which decreases a separate counter, which is the count2 counter. So what have I done? I've defined two buttons, one called increase count, one called decrease count. This one will increase the value of this variable. This one will decrease the value of this count2 variable. And both of these variables I am passing down to the counter component. Counter component mein, let me render counter1 is this thing, and counter2 is props.count2. Okay, I've changed the application a bit. This is what it looks like now. To go from the top, I have two state variables defined. I have two functions defined. One of them increases the value of count. The second one decreases the value of count2. ये दूसरे वाला. Pass both of them to the counter variable or counter whatever component. This one increases the first one. This one decreases the second one. And then I render both of them in the counter component. So यहाँ पे, if I now refresh, you will see this is increasing the value of count1. This is decreasing the value of count2. But notice ये कब run होता है? When does count has changed gets logged? Only when I increase the first count. If I increase the second count, the component will re-render because it is using count2. तो ये पूरा logic run होगा. But this will also get ignored. This will also get ignored because count hasn't changed. Count2 has changed when I click on this. Can you guess what happens if I introduce count2 as a dependency? Now I am depending on count2 as well. तो अब क्या होगा? Now it doesn't matter if I run this or if I run this. Both of them will cause this code to run. But if I only have count as the dependency, then only when count is changed, this gets logged. When I decrease count 2, nothing changes. If I increase count 1, then the log happens. So this is what the dependency array actually is. This is what use effect actually is. It is a much more generic utility, a much more generic hook. When you use it like this, which is how you will use it 90% of the times with an empty array, that is when it becomes, sort of a mount and an unmount life cycle event handler. क्या ये component जब mount हुआ, this runs, unmount हुआ, this runs. That is what the dependency array is. And the last thing was the cleanup. कि यहाँ पे हमने कहा भाई जब unmount हुआ, this will get called. Can you guess when will this function get called? If from the second use effect, I add a cleanup. Cleanup inside second effect. When do you think this will get logged? Whenever I again increase count. Basically, this gets called. This doesn't get called the first time this gets called. I repeat. पहली बार जब props.count अंदर आया, only this will get called. Now if count changed, then first cleanup will get called कि भाई पुरानी count का सब साफ कर लो. New count has come. And then this logic runs to on the new count. अब मान लो count went up to 3. Then again first the cleanup function will run कि count has now become 3. Count जब 2 थी वो बंद होने वाला है. Please clean up any logic you wrote. And then this gets called with count 3. Then count becomes 4. Then cleanup gets called for count 3. And then this gets called for count 4. So on and so forth. Lastly, when the component unmounts, then cleanup gets called for count equal to 4. So this function also is generic. ये तो हमारे केस में ऐसा हुआ कि since there is no dependency here, then this will run on mount. And जब unmount होगा सिर्फ then this will run. But since our second use effect depends on count, so the first time you pass something to this function, this gets logged. Now if you change this thing, तो पहले cleanup happens for the original thing. Then this gets called for the new thing. Then let's say you change this thing again. Then first this gets called for the original thing. Then this gets called for the new thing. So on and so forth. So ये cleanup logic बार बार होता है. Let me give you a very simple use case of this. Let's say these two buttons were something like tabs in whatever LinkedIn. So what tabs does LinkedIn have? This one is a home tab, my network tab, jobs tab, so on and so forth. So the buttons that I have are, let's say they were home, notifications, so on and so forth. बहुत सारे buttons हैं. So when I click on this, तब मुझे all the home information चाहिए. I need all the home information on my LinkedIn. I probably want to create a connection to the LinkedIn backend or whatever. But when I change this to the notifications tab, तब मुझे चाहिए कि भाई all the connections should stop from the home server. I need to make connections to the notification server. If I open the third tab, then I want to first clean up things from here, then do the new things here. That is where the cleanup logic comes into the picture. If this tab was a state variable, currently you're on tab 0, now you're on tab 1, now you're on tab 2. तो हमें चाहिए ना कि whenever I move from home to notifications, first all the home networks get cleaned up. If on LinkedIn, on my home page, I create a connection to the LinkedIn's home server, then I want कि if I move to my network, stop the connection to the home server, start a connection to the my network server. Then if I move to whatever this is jobs, stop a connection from this one, move on to the second one, so on and so forth. So that is where this cleanup logic comes into the picture. कि इनमें से कुछ भी अगर change हुआ, if any of these change, first the cleanup will get called for the original thing जो इससे पहले थी, and then this will get called for the new thing. The first time this renders, सिर्फ ये call होगा. The second time this renders, and let's say props.count changed, then first this will get rendered or whatever called, then this will get called. Then let's say count changed again, then again this will get called, and then this will get called. Then let's say count changed again, this will get called, this will get called. Then let's say component unmounted, then the cleanup will get called. That is how cleanup happens for a use effect with dependency arrays. We're at 9:40, so I think we'll pause here and I'll take a bunch of Q&As. Today we learned about use effect, dependency arrays, cleanups, useState. We were supposed to learn about a lot of things. We sort of understood conditional rendering, even though I'll cover it again in the offline video. Props I'll cover in the offline video. Children list. Yeah, all of these hopefully are much simpler. I will release an offline video covering all of these. useState and use effect are the most difficult ones. With that, if you understood everything, feel free to drop off before you go. Did you understand everything in the class? Do you understand useState and use effect? Please give me a yes or a no in the poll. Then if you understand everything, feel free to drop off. Here is another example, which is something someone asked, which is, very common use case also. Whenever a component mounts, okay, 78% only understood. So like we're very bad. So, we will answer some questions before we go tonight. And we might have an offline video of use effect in cohort 2. If we do, I will post it. If we don't, then I will recover use effect in the offline video. Okay, so don't worry if you did not understand this. So Q&A time, and then I'll cover this in an offline video again. Conditional rendering कैसे हो रही है वो समझ नहीं आया. Okay, वो तो खैर offline video में आएगी. तो just wait for the offline video, I guess. Wednesday max वैसे तो I will try for Tuesday, but Wednesday तक offline video should come. Repeat cleanup. My counter still keeps rendering on web page when I quit app server, even when clearing the unmount. How to stop it? My counters, even when I quit the app server when cleaning on mount. If you are cleaning it on unmount, पहली बात तो doesn't matter if you kill the app server. That doesn't change anything. You have already given the website code. When you go to localhost:5173, you get the React code over here. Now, even if you kill the server, your application will still keep on running. So, ऐसा नहीं है कि killing this will do anything. Second new thing was कि the cleanup is not happening for your, put logs and try to debug. You are saying कि you are cleaning up the clock here, still it is not cleaning up. Put some logs and see, is the cleanup getting called? Is the clock that you got, you wrote something like this, const clock equal to set interval. So does this clock variable have something? Are you calling the right clock variable when you're doing clock interval? And try to debug like that. Conditional rendering कैसे हो रही है and cleanup वही same question है दो. Please explain unmount one more time and when it get logged. Assignments when Akash just messaged Prash for assignments for React. Hopefully by tomorrow. Or if not tomorrow, day after, but we'll try to do it. Class is over officially. So yeah, feel free to drop off. Nothing new more that we'll learn. We'll just be, answering questions from Q&A. Does use effect have any cache to make it so that call a particular thing? What does that mean? Use effect make any cache so that it just call a particular thing. What do you mean just call a particular thing? You can make sure that this logic gets called only when a particular thing changes by passing it as a dependency. But use effect doesn't have any cache to do whatever you're asking. Next week is going to be React only. React will be at least 3 weeks. So this week, next week, uske next week maybe state management, then maybe Tailwind. Yeah, that much. So React is at least 4 to 5 weeks. So full month is going to be React. I can do a poll though. Okay, do you guys want me to release a series on React or should we go week by week? I'm okay with either. Based on the poll, we can decide. Can you please explain virtual DOM? There will be an offline video. I'll give you a TLDR. Basically, whenever state variable changes, what do you think? React क्या करता है? Does it first check कि अच्छा अभी क्या दिख रहा है यहाँ पे? What do I see over here? Then does it start from the top and start to recreate the DOM and then compare both of them? That would be, every DOM operation is very expensive. Whenever you do document.get element by whatever, that is a very expensive operation. Get element by ID. So what React does it creates a copy of this DOM called the virtual DOM. I repeat, कहता है यहाँ पे तो मैं डाल ही रहा हूँ सब, आई एम पुटिंग एवरीथिंग हियर, लेट मी ऑल्सो क्रिएट अ कॉपी ऑफ दिस एज एन ऑब्जेक्ट इन मेमोरी सो दैट whenever the state changes, I calculate the new state कैसी दिखनी चाहिए. I can calculate the diff using that virtual DOM. I don't have to go to the DOM, do a document.getElement by ID body, let's say, and then get the whole body right now and compare it with the new state. I have a virtual DOM. इसकी एक virtual representation मेरे पास है. I have a virtual representation of this in an object. That is what I will use for calculating all the differences like this, rather than going to the DOM again and again and checking कि भाई अच्छा what do you have, what is the current state, what is the difference, what should we change. So virtual DOM is just a copy of the DOM. It's much more lightweight, by which I mean कि वो यहाँ render नहीं होती है. Just think of it like this. It's something that looks like this. Let vdom equal to, it has a body which has let's say div1 which div1 के अंदर उन्होंने लिखा हुआ है counter 1 0, and then it has another child called div2 inside which it is written body counter 2 0, so on and so forth. It's just an object representation of what you see on the screen right now. Figma seems less time consuming in coding. Can I create good UI after mastering CSS? I don't think you can. I think a little bit of Figma you need to know for that design sense, to build up the design sense. I don't think mastering CSS, unless you could do a lot of practice and create similar things probably. Which project will we be doing after MERN? It's all present on blog.analyticsteps.com. So you can look at the projects there for cohort 3. So LinkedIn home tab is a useState variable, and depends if they're using React, yes. And the network tab is a use effect after cleanup. No. Current tab is a state variable. If you go to LinkedIn, if you have to design something like LinkedIn today, you would say the current tab is a state variable. Uski value currently is home. If I click on this, its value becomes my network. If I click on this, its value becomes jobs. So each one of a variable called tabs, there is a variable like this called const current tab comma set current tab equal to useState home, let's say, something like this. So this is what we have, and this keeps on changing to whatever notifications based on when you click on this and this, and when you go from here to here, you want if the current tab changes, if the current tab changes, then I want to do a cleanup. Return function. यहाँ पे I want to do whatever, disconnect from the last tab backend server, and here I want to connect to the current tab backend server, something like this. I learned something new. A function can return a function. Yes, you can. A function can take a function as an input. A function can return a function. Which project? Okay, answer that. Please do consider giving 2 minutes on some high-level context on the vulnerabilities while installing node mod packages. It always gets stuck in my head. npm audit fix doesn't get it. Try to go but yeah, basically people don't care about it as much as they should. But any library that you're using may be vulnerable to attacks. Uske developer पे depend करता है भाई. If you are doing npm install express today, but if the express maintainer goes haywire or crazy or whatever, then you might be able to bring in some bad vulnerable code into your machine. So a lot of these libraries get labeled as case mein vulnerability hai. So that is why you see that specific error over here. Do companies ignore it usually? They do usually. Should you do it? Probably not. But sort of gets thrown down lower in the priority stack, this specific error whenever you see it. All right. How long will React go? For at least a month, unless you guys say release it in a week, then I can release recorded videos in a week as well. I'm fine with either. Why unmount is not being logged despite no dependency array? So पहली बात तो you shouldn't ever have no dependency array. You should have at least an empty dependency array here. You should never have no dependency array. If you have an empty dependency array, unmount will get called whenever this app component, let's say, unmounts. जब भी ये DOM से चला जाएगा, whatever is written over here will get logged on the screen, or whatever this code will run whenever app gets unmounted. When I pass props, I get error count is missing in props validation. Are you passing in count like this? Are you receiving it in the right component? That shouldn't happen unless you're, I don't know. Can you paste your code in a gist and show it in narasabharti131, whatever your email is? Can somebody share the current code? Yeah, this is the current code. Oh, sorry. This is it. I've pasted it in chat. I don't think it's very hard. I have to, yeah, exactly. It's true for coding anything. Nothing is hard. You search React useState, you'll find 10 videos. It's just, unless you are coding yourself, you will not learn. Why unmount is not being logged besides notice? As I said, it should be. Repeat cleanup, let 2 minutes, or I'll just create another offline video on useState. I think it might not go into your head now, and I have also trained to repeat it. But in the offline video, I will almost start from the top only, which is like not great. That means we didn't cover anything today. But I'll start from here and go to the end. All right. When I pass okay, answer that. How do you make such websites? Oh, this is a very common use case. This is like Agario, right? I was about to build something like this on YouTube, by the way. This is, you need some sort of a canvas library. Yeah, this is like Agario. You eat each other, right? This uses some sort of a canvas library, most probably. They're like very famous game engines. Phaser is one, you might have heard of it. And Babylon is one if you want to go both 2D or 3D. So these specific frameworks let you render things like these, like the circle that you see or the grass that you see behind, the water that you see on screen. And they do collision detection. For example, when I collide with this, it's stopping me from going there, right? All of this logic is written over there. So it is a combination of that and some real-time backend like a WebSocket server where everyone's position is getting relayed, so you see everyone here on the screen. It's like fairly simple, basically, like a 5-6 hour code along if I build one. Sorry, I got distracted. एक Zoom में inbox का option होना चाहिए to like message each other. You mean? How do I close this? Looks like a very interesting game. I want to build, feel like building this now. Tell Kirat yourself upload the session ASAP, very good for revision before assignments. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll try to. Today should be possible. Yesterday wasn't. But as I said, they come on harkirat.classics.co.in immediately. Not immediately, like in 2 hours. So you should go there to find it. Usually, and app.nxs.com they come eventually. What is unmounting exactly? Great question. Mount क्या होता है? This is a bottle. I have mounted the cap on it. I have unmounted the cap from it. Mounted the cap, unmounted the cap. A while back we were doing conditional rendering, if you remembered. What were we doing? We did something like this. Okay. Const is visible, comma set is visible equal to useState true. And then I said okay, every 5 seconds, what did I say? Okay, every 5 seconds, so set interval every 5 seconds, I want to set is visible to be the opposite of what it was. This is something we wrote a while back. And यहाँ पे I said that this will render conditionally. If is visible is true, only then it will render, else it won't render. That is what this means. Is visible and counter. मतलब अगर visible है, only then render this on screen. So that is what we wrote a while back. Let's see this in action. hell? My enter key is dead. Ah, shoot. My keyboard is slowly giving up. Alright, time to change the keyboard. Very bad timing for this to happen. And so my down key was also dead only for a while. But the enter key is much more important. Or my machine is dead, or one of these two things. So my enter key is not dead. That's a good thing. I'm just not able to press enter. Oh, I had a screenshot enabled or what? Ah, my bad. Sorry. I don't know where I reached. Enter key is empty. Alright, this doesn't work because let's look at the error. Count is not defined. Where have I written count? Right here. So let me remove those. Hide is on screen. After 5 seconds, nothing happens. Refresh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it goes away. I will say counter has unmounted from the screen. Just how? I remove the cap and now I've added the cap. I have mounted the component. After 5 seconds, I have unmounted the component. After 5 seconds, I have mounted the component. If I go to LinkedIn, I have mounted the My Network tab. I have unmounted the Home tab. Now I will unmount the My Network tab. I will mount the Jobs tab or component. तो you know, mounting means कि आपने replace कर दिया, पुराना हटा दिया वहाँ से component, नया counter डाल दिया. The component that you're putting on screen is getting mounted. The component that you're removing from screen is getting unmounted. Q&A. Do notifications can be sent from sockets in real-time messages or any other? No. So what kind of notifications? You mean push notifications or normal notifications? For normal notifications, yeah, it's a combination of HTTP and WebSockets. For push notifications, a whole different protocol. All right. Notion doc. Another doc. All right. I mean, hard projects, I have a lot of them on this thing. Code review bot. This is a very good one. There's also some people built in Super 30. I can point you to the code. Or if you want to do it yourself, minor code reviews saying build a bot and just GitHub. Oh, this is a very good idea, but this will require AI knowledge. Like a Dosu bot that does the same thing. Static code analysis. Oh, you're doing static code analysis, like nothing related to AI. That's fine as well. This is actually not a bad idea. Very good. Okay, you know, a website where it gets hooked up to GitHub PRs and you know it does whatever, as you said, static file analysis, probably does styling analysis, things like these, and you know, posts a link in the comment. Okay, this is your report for the final. This thing has the code become healthier or unhealthier based on this PR. Here, set count. Does it track the current and the previous value? Does it track the current and previous value? It doesn't track them. Whenever you call set count, you can call it with a function, which when that function gets called, very long statement I'm saying. If you look at the type of set is visible, right? What does this return? It returns S and dispatch of set state action. It's like very hard to read this. There you go. Value a void. A function that can be used to update the state of this thing. If you look at its type, or you know, whatever the type of this dispatch function is, the type of set state is, it is a function which has the value as the input and returns void. So whenever you are, it is this. Sorry, I got confused myself. Basically what I wanted to say was that the arguments of set is visible if you look at the arguments of set is visible, you can either pass in, just the value, which let's say this is a boolean, then you will pass in false over here, or you can pass in something like this, which is a function here given this initial value, given this initial value, this should be the final value based on the initial value. अगर आपको initial value, current value, not the initial value, current value. If you are dependent on the current value, you should pass in a function to the set call rather than passing the final value. You can do not x over here as well, but that will give you problems because we haven't passed x as a dependency here. If you're ever using x, you should pass it as a dependency. That will open another can of worms, which is why, whenever you're setting the variable, set it using a function that you can either do like this or do like this. So it doesn't track the value, which was your original question. Q&A. Oh, sorry, I was in Notion doc. Use mount. What about use mount? Does it track the component is renting or not? Is there a hook called use mount? This might be like an extra additional hook, which, as the name suggests, under the hood it probably uses use effect only. And what was your question again about use mount? Does it track the component if it is rendering or not? It tracks whether the component has mounted. It tracks, is this the first time the component is going on the DOM? And if yes, then whatever, in this case, alert will get printed on the screen. So that is what a use mount hook would do, although it doesn't exist by default. There's an external library that has exposed it. Use effect. Can't digest the dependency part. Yeah, I'll release an offline video on this. Use effect is hard. Hopefully there is an offline video from cohort 2. If not, I'll release one. Check this. Use effect is like setting up a side task or reaction whenever something changes when a component mounts. Think of it like a way of doing something whenever something important happens. Exactly. That is great. For example, if you have changed the tab, that is something important happening. So that is when you want some code to run. Real life analogy. Imagine you have an alarm clock that rings every time you add or remove a coffee cup, or perhaps just rings when you open the app to remind you the places to order. React equivalent. In React, use effect allows you to perform actions like fetching data. Yeah, that's a good analogy. The coffee wali thodi went right over my head, probably because I'm a little phased out. But yeah, if someone wants to take a screenshot, feel free to take a screenshot and understand this via real world analogy. Tier 3 question, Accenture 4.5. A lot of people get into Accenture. There's this other guy in Super 30 who's also in Accenture. So think about Accenture. I think they were decreased. I don't know. Cognizant actually. I'm confused. Even though I cleared the coding after, sorry. Got selected. You did not get selected. I got rejected. Oh my bad. I'm sorry. Get selected. It's really frustrating. Yeah, I mean, it's very random also, right? You might do a lot of projects, then they might ask DSA. In this case, you did a lot of DSA projects. So, unfortunately, you can't prepare for this. It's just, or you can prepare for this by doing everything. But, long story short is ke, theek hai, koi baat nahi, if not Accenture, someone else will come and, by then have projects ready. But, again, then they might ask lead code. So, it's very hard to predict this upfront. My portfolio website. First React website with a YT and docs help. All right, let's see. Yeah, pretty decent. Okay, I understand that we shouldn't use ID parameter in post requests. They're exposed. Have limit how much data we can send. Then why use rec.body method even get.put? Why even query params exist? Well, in get requests you can't send the. How will you send body here? If I want to send some data to the backend, how can I go to google.com and body equal to something? I can't, right? So for a get request, query params or headers are the only way to send data to the backend. You can probably, maybe not, I'm not unsure. You may or may not be able to send body in a get request. But yes, this I said that also. If you want, everything can be done just via headers. आपको body भी use करने की जरूरत नहीं है, query params भी use करने कुछ मत use करो. But this is standard practice. If you're sending a get request, then you send the data via query params. If you why do you have to send a post request or a get request or a put request? Send all post requests. It's just practice, right? It is a good hygiene to make sure all of your getting data, it should be a get request. If it is a putting data, it should be a post request. How to convert vanilla JS into ES6? There are various ways, various bundlers. Easiest is just initialize TypeScript, go from there, make it extremely set strict to false. That way you can write JavaScript code in there and write ES6 logic. That's the easiest. Node.js specific things like buffer are being used by browser now. Why it's not built in the browser? It might just come at some point, if I'm being honest. These APIs weren't present for whatever reason, they weren't needed, or whatever, uint8 array was enough. But then eventually Node.js came, runtime probably needed buffer for whatever reason, they introduced it. So now it's sort of become a compulsion for the browser to also introduce it. Things move very slow. Chrome code base changes rarely, so that is why it'll be a long time before it comes directly. Assignments for this week, tomorrow tak. In poll, besides yes or no to accurate results. I already knew this. Point. Let's do that, Akash. Guide me for remote jobs. Building a lot of projects is the only advice I have. Very generic sort of profile. I've seen a bunch of these profiles. Basically, in the end, how are you differentiating yourself from everyone, which could be your real DSA or dev, and just being able to showcase that is a high level. All right. I've seen some of regex, but I don't understand them. And you told it's useful in programming language. I also tried using MDN docs. Regex are really hard. I don't understand them either. I don't design my regex myself. I just Google it. What is the regex for an email and copy and paste it over. It's very hard to write regex yourself. If you haven't taught about this in any cohort, then please upload offline video or make new on regex. Useful, provide docs. Yeah, sure. That's nothing. There's not much to explain in regex otherwise than then the full diving into its syntax and then trying to design regexes ourselves. I can make a short 10-minute videos and tell you what they are supposed to do and how you use regexes. Which question was this? I have no idea. Which question was this? I have no idea what question this was. But how to solve this question? How would I have solved that question? That should probably be enough for regexes. If you want to even understand regexes, ekdam achhe se, start to write regexes yourself for emails, let's say. But usually you just Google it. What is the regex for an email? You bring it to your code base. You do whatever check you want. Does learning from tutorial isn't good? In every video, people who crack remote jobs and told that they were, yes, it does help. I mean, both are depends on your level, right? If you're a complete beginner, then you will get very lost in the docs. So their videos help. But unless you are coding yourself, so they were building a lot of projects themselves. So they had to, as you are building an XYZ project, you will not go to catch a Harkirat. Where is that video where Harkirat was talking about XYZ and start to go to it? You will simply Google it and go to the docs and try to figure it out. So that's why. How much JS someone needed to get remote jobs? Almost zero only. I say almost because some companies ask, but most of them don't. You've already built this. Could you Twitter share the password to DM? Alright, let's try it. Sounds like a decent idea. You are ISRAK.